Welcome to episode 10 of Mina Narrates. I'm your host, Mina. Thanks for joining me in my library. This episode features part 2 of There's a Killer in My Town by Charlie Blackmoore, aka Beautiful Nightmare. It's the third part of an 11-part series I'm honored to be allowed to present to you. This series releases every Wednesday at 5:45 p.m. Central Time, 6:45 p.m. Eastern, via YouTube premiere through October to December 2nd. So far, our killer is on a roll, as he made Dean Randall sheriff of Snow Creek. Dean has gone rogue to hunt the killer alone after his husband and deputy were killed. However, in this part, we're gonna go back in time to get some background on Dean and Marcus, as well as see the beginning of the murder spree. Before we begin, please remember to like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring the bell if you haven't, so that you are notified when I release new videos. You don't want to miss any of this series. Now, let me whisper in your ears. Callie, after all this time, something occurred to me. I never told you how I met Marcus, did I? I was 2 months into my first semester of college at Sonata University. It was a dull place to be, despite the recent renovations that made it look interesting. I attended every class on time, completed my homework the nights they were assigned, and mainly kept myself aside from making a few friends around campus. I was doing pretty well for myself, considering I was an 18-year-old kid in an unfamiliar town. Every day was the same as the next. Well, at least until he came along. It was the day before Halloween. I was leaning against the dark blue-colored wall beside my dorm room, talking to a few of the other guys in surrounding rooms when I noticed him. He was dressed in a red t-shirt, blue denim jeans, and black shoes to match his watch. He was easily 6 feet tall, with jet black hair and dark brown eyes that blended perfectly with his light brown skin. I was immediately taken when he flashed me a friendly smile that I barely noticed the resident advisor of the dormitory walking alongside him. I had no idea who he was. I had never met a man more handsome. I thought that the odds of seeing him again were 1 in a million. However, the more days that went by, the more I saw of that handsome man. We would casually smile whenever we passed one another in the dormitory, in the cafeteria, or anywhere else on campus. This went on for a few months, but I never had the courage to introduce myself. He was a senior after all. I shook the tempting thoughts out of my mind and focused all of my time and energy into school. It was the weekend before Christmas break. I didn't have the best childhood, so going home wasn't the top of my priority list until the next weekend. I remember sitting in my dorm room, working on an essay for one of my classes, when something lightly tapped on the door. I was frustrated enough with my homework, so I wasn't happy about being interrupted. That was before I pulled open the door. Standing there with another friendly yet dashing smile was the man I had secretly been desiring. That was the exact point in time when he seized my heart and cemented our future. I knew I needed him more than anything else, and he became my everything. With that being said, I haven't written you in a while, my dear little sister, and I'm sorry for that. But things have gotten a little crazy around here. Comes with the territory of my job. It's just different this time. I guess I owe you an explanation. I'm just not sure where to begin. It was a Tuesday afternoon. My husband Marcus and I decided to have lunch in the park since it was a beautiful day and we would have privacy. You couldn't have a lunch date in a restaurant because any conversation overheard would be spread around the small town in less than an hour, and it was the last thing I needed to have happen. I sat down at the picnic bench across from Marcus, our lunches already waiting to be devoured, except I didn't have an appetite. The trees rustled in the chilly breeze as I stared down at the wrapped sandwich in front of me. I really wanted to eat. I just couldn't. I wasn't having the best day, and I think Marcus could sense it. His fingers lightly touched the bottom of my chin and lifted my head high enough to look at him. "You look stressed," Marcus said. "I'm beyond stressed, babe. The station is a madhouse today." "Is that why you were called in during the middle of the night?" "Yeah, and I wish they hadn't," I sighed. "There was a murder last night. It was gruesome." "Well, tell me about it. It's my job to listen, isn't it?" The sheriff was there when I arrived at the crime scene, in the alley behind Mason's bar. He told me I was called there for a reason, but that I shouldn't see the victim. You know me, though. I wasn't about to be called in and not see what's happening, despite being told to stay back. So I shoved past him, ducked under the caution tape, and lying there was what? Officer Thompson. His torso was cut open and odd. I paused. His organs were sitting on the ground beside him. It was horrible, Marcus. Jesus, Dean, I'm so sorry. I know how close you and Ethan were. Marcus frowned. He placed his hand atop mine as a way of trying to comfort me. Ethan was my partner since day one. I can't believe he's gone, I sobbed. Marcus jumped from his side of the picnic table, rushed over to my side, and threw his arms around me. I usually tried not to let my emotions get the best of me, yet I couldn't help it. My work partner was murdered in the most terrible way, and there was no evidence to give us a lead in the case. I wasn't sure if we didn't have a lead because we were all so tired, or if we were all too close to the investigation. All I know is that we needed something, and we needed it fast. "It's gonna be okay, honey. You're gonna catch the bastard that did this. I know it." "My lunch break's almost over. I should get back to the station." "Okay. Please be careful. I don't know what I'd do if I lost you because you were too upset to drive," Marcus said. "I'll be fine. I love you, Dean." "I love you too," I replied. Marcus held me tighter for a few more minutes before he kissed my cheek. I stood up from the table, threw our unfinished lunches into the nearby trash can, and silently walked with him to our cars. I waved to Marcus as he drove away from the park. However, all I could do was sit in my car and think about Officer Thompson. Ethan had taught me everything I knew. How to watch my back when in the field, how to be stealthy if you're on a stakeout or simply trying to apprehend a suspect, and to always call for backup. He used to tell me to never chase after a suspect without someone covering you. Ethan knew better than to go into that damn alley alone. So why did he? I angrily punched the steering wheel a couple of times after starting the car. I backed out of the parking spot I was in and sped off towards the police station. I really didn't want to go back because I didn't want to hear how everyone else was affected by Ethan's sudden death. Yeah, they had known him a lot longer than I had, but I was the one who'd spent most of my time with him over the last 3 years. The rest of the day went by as slowly as expected. Everyone began their morning process while I was on lunch, and that only pissed me off more. I understood. I really did. Yet they didn't seem to realize how much it bothered me to hear them talk about Ethan in the way they had. Some weren't actually upset about his death, while the rest of them talked about him as if he had been dead for years. I sat at my desk the remainder of the day with headphones in to keep myself from yelling at everyone to shut the hell up. I filled out the paperwork that needed to be done, filled out arrest forms, and made sure that the jail cells were actually locked, and no one in custody could walk out of here because of the other officers not paying attention to what they were supposed to be doing. I sat at my desk carefully studying every single photo taken at the crime scene. I wasn't sure how long I had sat there, but the sun had already set when I finally tucked the photos in a case file. I stood up from my chair, stretched my sore limbs, and shut the lamp off. I grabbed my coat off the back of my chair, made sure my phone was in my pants pocket, and slowly walked toward the door. The sheriff pulled me aside before I could exit the building. I was glad to see I wasn't the only one working late, but I was upset when he asked me to visit Ethan's family. I reluctantly agreed, walked out of the police station, and got into my car. I drove as slowly as possible to figure out the best way to break the news to Ethan's wife, Sarah, and their 2 kids, Max and Hermione. Fuck, there wasn't a good way to tell anyone that their loved one had passed away. I pulled up alongside the curb in front of Ethan's house. I stepped out of my car and took my time walking up the stairs. I exhaled a deep breath and hesitantly rang the doorbell. It took less than a minute for the front door to swing open. Sarah had a worried expression plastered on her face, while the kids stood anxiously on either side of her. I explained the situation as gracefully as I could because of the kids. However, the 3 of them broke down in tears, leaving me to awkwardly pull them into a hug. The other officers might have been close to Ethan, but no one was as close to him as I was. Otherwise, they'd be right here watching Sarah try to calm down Max and Hermione. That shit really takes a toll on people, especially me. I gave my condolences many times before hurrying out of that unsettling situation. I returned home about 20 minutes after leaving Ethan's house. I just couldn't handle seeing his family so distraught. My stomach was tied in knots when I stepped inside the front door of my house. I took off my jacket, hung it up on the coat rack, took off my belt, and tossed it on the small table beside the door. Marcus was laying on the couch when I walked into the living room. Light snoring echoed through the room despite the television quietly playing in the background. I leaned over the couch, put my hand on his leg, and shook him. It took a while, but Marcus finally woke up, rather confused. "Come on, let's go to bed," I said. "What time is it?" he asked. About 10 o'clock. Huh, I must have fallen asleep after dinner." "Probably. I called 7 times and you didn't answer." "Did you have dinner?" "No," I said. "I've been looking at crime scene photos all day. I couldn't keep anything down if I tried." "You need to eat, Dean." He frowned. I shook my head once more and started for the staircase. "I'm going to bed. I'm tired." "I'll be up in a minute." "Oh, okay." I trudged up the staircase exhausted and consumed in my thoughts. I walked down the hallway into the bathroom and closed the door behind me. I brushed my teeth as quickly as my tired arm would let me before making my way to the bedroom. I didn't bother to flip the light switch on. Instead, I stripped down to my boxers when Marcus walked in. The cool sheets of the king-size bed enveloped me as I lay down, the comforter coaxing me to the land of sleep as Marcus slid his arm around my shoulder and pulled me closer to him. My head rested against his chest. His steady heartbeat was a soothing, familiar sound, yet my heart was filled with sorrow for the loss of my best friend and the guilt of having to deliver the bad news to his family. Ethan gets out of his cruiser, his flashlight illuminating the dark alley surrounding him. He slowly turns to look down the cramped area when something in the distance rumbles and makes him jump. Quickly spinning around, he shines his light on the old decrepit dumpster he had parked by. The lump in his throat and fragrance from yesterday's trash rotting nearby causes his throat to be hoarse and his voice to be rough. "Who's there?" He struggled to maintain the commanding tone he was going for. "I need you to come with your hands where I can see them." There was a moment of silence between the 2 of us. Him focusing on his light where he thought the sound came from, and myself analyzing the entire situation. I slowly stood up from where I had been crouched and hiding, my hands comfortable pressed in the pockets of my dark jacket, my left hand tightly gripping the handle of a small knife. I stepped towards him quickly, my shoes not making a sound despite the shards of broken glass and loose rocks scattered throughout the alleyway. I stepped slowly to the rhythm of the city around us. The darkness was my cover in the night. The slight sounds of the late-night city masked the sound of my feet pressing against the concrete. I pulled my hands from my pockets and poised myself to strike. When I was certain nothing could go wrong, I lifted the blade and ran it across his neck, pulling as hard as I could to eliminate any margin of error. It had to be quick, and it had to be deep. Ethan jumped as the blade ran across his throat. The flashlight fell from his hands and hit the concrete with a metallic clunking sound. He attempted to turn and look at me, but the immediate and extensive blood loss had ripped consciousness from his mind, and he was dead before his head bounced off the concrete. I knelt down beside his lifeless body and rolled him over to his back. My eyes met his. They were motionless and gray. His face would forever remain in that twisted stare of surprise, that look of being caught off guard and having your entire life removed within what was less than half a minute. I quickly got to work, unbuttoning his shirt and staring at his aged skin. The knife in my hand craved to cut him open. It needed to carve into his cold flesh. I slowly positioned the blade over him and measured in my mind how far I would need to cut and where to start. The metal pierced his stomach, and I started to slowly glide it through his body, the knife gliding across aged and rough skin without issue, causing it to gradually loosen and fall apart. I awakened to my body being violently shaken. My eyes groggily opened to see Marcus peering down at me with a worried expression plastered to his face. I leisurely sat upright in the bed and turned to look at him. However, he raised his arm, a bright light temporarily blinding me. It took half a second for my eyes to adjust to the brightness before I realized that the message displayed on the screen of my cell phone was a text message from another officer. Tanya Hastings. She was always the bearer of bad news. Oh, Tanya, how I wish you hadn't disturbed me. I shook my head out of disappointment and annoyance. Was I not allowed to have one night of peaceful sleep? I threw the comforter off my legs and dangled them over the edge of the bed. Marcus said nothing as I stood up. A heavy sigh escaped my lips when I picked up last night's discarded clothes and quickly stepped into them. Marcus knew not to question. He knew to lay back down and go to sleep while I headed off to work. I trudged out of the bedroom, down the staircase into the living room where I retrieved my shoes. I strapped my belt on, slid into my jacket, and slammed the front door shut as I stepped onto the porch. The chilly night air nipped my warm cheeks as I went to my car. The quiet neighborhood surprisingly wasn't woken up when the loud engine of my car started. I backed out of the driveway and sped off to the direction of the latest crime. Sheriff Callahan was standing at the gate to Snow Creek Cemetery when I pulled into the small driveway. I hesitantly shut the car off, stepped onto the recently placed cement. My shoes sank into the spots that hadn't yet dried. The car door shut when the sheriff approached me. "I appreciate you coming here, Dean. We really need all hands on deck with this situation," Sheriff Callahan distraughtly said. "Why am I here?" I angrily asked. He said nothing as he hastily walked away. I, too, remained silent while following his lead. We walked past the cemetery gates and into the first row of tombstones. "The only reason you're here is strictly for a fresh set of eyes, understood?" "Yeah," I nodded. We continued to the site where the investigative lights were set up. I stepped underneath the caution tape, pushing my way through the crowd of officers only to see another victim. My heart felt like it had sunk into the pit of my stomach upon seeing the same display as Ethan. Short, silver hair rested just above the latest victim's shoulders. Her eyes still held a look of fear, even though they were white and glassed over. Her throat had been slashed from right to left. Her torso completely cut open, each organ laid in a perfect line beside her body. "God damn it, Winnie," I muttered. "What the fuck were you doing out here alone?" "Officer Michaels was checking out a complaint made by the groundskeeper. He said someone was lurking around the cemetery. She should have waited for backup," Sheriff Callahan said. I angrily stood up from the ground and shot him a menacing glare. Why the hell wasn't somebody with her, especially after what happened to Ethan? I questioned. "Too many officers are afraid to patrol the streets at night." Winifred insisted that she was able to handle the job by herself. By herself? I was taken aback by this statement. What the hell is wrong with you people? You all know damn well we double up when someone's killing our own. I swear, you are all a bunch of cowards. "Calm down," Callahan warned. or else I'll have you escorted off the scene." The authoritative tone of voice wasn't something I had the pleasure of experiencing until now. I considered standing my ground. Could he not see that this situation could have easily been avoided? "My apologies, sir," I relented. "I just don't think it's right to let officers patrol alone right now for this exact reason. We need to enforce our policies to keep everyone safe." "Well, then, would you care to patrol with Officer Collins on night shift?" The question felt sarcastic, but I decided to answer it anyway. If it means keeping another officer from being harmed, then yes, I would. I kept my focus on him. My stare was stern and unwavering. "Go home," he said, shaking his head and sighing. "Get some rest. You start your patrol tonight." I nodded in agreement before walking away from the scene. I had a feeling that something like this was bound to happen after how we found Ethan. I felt like I should have said something sooner, like it would have made a difference. I knew that Callahan was about to retire, but he might not get a chance if we keep losing officers like this. The loud buzzer of the alarm clock woke me up around 8:45 on Wednesday evening. I lazily rolled out of bed, took a quick shower, got dressed, and made my way down the staircase. Marcus was sitting on the couch, paperwork and case files spread across the coffee table, while he mindlessly stared at the television. He wasn't thrilled. No, he was disappointed I had made the decision to patrol at night without talking to him first. However, he understood the reason why I was doing it. I swore to protect the citizens of this town. That included the fellow officers. The news wasn't reporting something of importance. Thankfully, the press hadn't gotten wind of the recent murders. The last thing we need right now is to have the town in a panic. "How did you sleep?" Marcus asked. I hadn't realized his attention was directed at me. Like shit," I sighed. "It's different sleeping alone." "I know, but at least you're doing the right thing." "Trying, at least. No one seems to understand how bad this is. It's like they don't care." "Everyone grieves in a different way, Dean. They care, even if it doesn't seem like it." "No offense, but you weren't there, babe. You didn't see—" I paused. I carefully thought of the right way to explain the delicacy of the situation without sounding like a douchebag. The look in both Ethan and Winnie's eyes were pure terror. Did they even have time to understand what was happening when the person attacked them? "Listen, you're a good man, and I understand why you're doing this. Believe me, I do. We both know you can't save everyone, no matter how hard you try. Just don't change the way you are because other people seem like they aren't taking this as seriously as they should," he sweetly says. "My husband says some of the greatest things. He has the best intentions. I knew that. He wasn't there. He didn't see what I did, so he doesn't exactly understand how this is affecting me. I want to talk about it. I don't know how, though. I can't express my feelings right now without yelling. Be thankful you don't have to see what I do. I have to get to work. I'll call you later. Hey, no matter what happens out there tonight, just remember that I love you." He smiled. "I love you too," I said. Marcus stood up from the couch as I walked toward the front door. I should eat something, but my stomach won't be able to handle it. Not yet, at least. I grabbed my belt, wrapped it around my waist, and fastened it as Marcus kissed my cheek. The one good thing about being with Marcus is that he has always been there for me. No matter the situation, he had been the rock in my life. He waved goodbye when I walked to my car. I shouldn't have agreed to patrol at night. I wanted to be home keeping my husband safe. However, I wasn't going to let another officer be harmed because no one is following procedure to double up. Fucking cowards. Officer Collins and I met up at the police station. I reluctantly got in his police cruiser. Something about this guy didn't sit right with me. Luke and I weren't close. Sure, we had had a few conversations every once in a while, but I wouldn't say we were friends. My mind was focused on the 2 cases we had so far while Luke drove up and down random streets. My gaze glued to the windshield in front of me to spot any sort of suspicious activity. There were a few people staggering out of Mason's bar. They stood on the sidewalk to smoke cigarettes before heading off into different directions. I made note of their descriptions on my cell phone in case something were to happen throughout the shift. Night patrol was just as boring as everyone claimed it to be, even before Officer Thompson and Officer Michaels died. Vivid images of the dream I had the previous night flashed in my mind, which caused my chest to heavily rise and fall. I could feel myself beginning to panic. I hadn't told Marcus about the dream yet. I didn't want to worry him. I closed my eyes for a moment in an attempt to gather myself. I shook the images from my head along with the dark thoughts and opened my eyes to see that we were heading towards the post office. I was certain Luke had noticed my odd behavior, but I'm hoping he hadn't. I wasn't sure how long it had been since we left the station. A few hours, maybe? I was stuck on this idea until his voice brought me out of my thoughts. "So, how are things with you and Marcus?" Luke inquired. "We're fine," I hesitated to answer. "What about you and Christine?" "Christine and I broke up a while ago. She couldn't handle the stress of worrying about when or if I would come home." "Wow, that, sucks. I'm sorry, man." I don't blame her. This job gets intense at times, especially now, you know?" "Yeah." Something about his statement was incredibly uncaring. "I've been meaning to see how you were doing after Officer Thompson. You guys were real close." "Can we not talk about Ethan? No offense, but..." I caught myself in this sentence, realizing the unintentional can of worms I may have just opened. "Go ahead and say it, Dean." "Fuck. I'm really sorry, Luke. I was so wrapped up in my own grief, I didn't stop to think about how you must be feeling. He was your uncle, after all." "Uh-huh. You know, you're the first person at the department that has actually mentioned that." "Yeah, Ethan was my uncle. He raised me and all that. But you were like a son to him. I can guarantee that he'd be devastated had it been you." Luke said. "What's your plan to catch the sick fuck who's doing this?" "My plan? What do you mean, my plan?" "Come on, Randall. I was there last night when you yelled at Sheriff Callahan. You must have a plan if you were willing to take night shift." "I don't have a plan, Collins. The only thing I'm focused on right now is making sure that no one else gets hurt." What was he expecting me to say? "Come in, Officer Collins." The dispatcher cut into the conversation. Luke and I shared concerned expressions as he picked up the receiver. He let out a shaky sigh before pressing the button and responding. "Go for Collins? Have you seen Officer Jenkins, Phillips, or Curtis?" "No, ma'am." "They responded to a 1062 about 6 hours ago near the intersection of Hallow Drive and Main Street. Can you check it out?" "Copy." Luke didn't bother to turn on the sirens while he stomped on the gas pedal. He swerved in and out of the few cars that were on the road. There was no warning when he quickly turned left and pulled up the emergency brake. He sped down Main Street before the car came to an abrupt stop. My head hit the dashboard. Pain instantly radiated throughout my body. Never in my life had I been more grateful to be wearing a seatbelt. This kid drove like a maniac. Headlights illuminated the darkened street. My eyes scanned the surrounding area. Yet I froze when I noticed 3 dark figures laying on the ground in a perfectly straight line, as if they had been running from something. An annoying beeping noise fills my ears as the overhead lights in the car came on. I looked towards the driver's seat to see that Luke was already out of the car. I hastily unstrapped my seatbelt and jumped out of the car. "Get your ass back here, Lucas!" I hissed. "Call for backup, now!" he shouted. Great. I'd been trying to be quiet in case anyone lurking nearby could hear us. But he had to go and be dramatic about the situation. I pressed the button on the walkie strapped to my shoulder. "Dispatch," I said. "Go ahead." "We're on the intersection of Hollow Drive and Main Street. I believe we found Officer Jenkins, Phillips, and Curtis. Call the sheriff." "Dean!" Luke shouted once more. My feet carefully approached Luke and the 3 figures, despite the voice in my head that was telling me to get the hell out of here. The scene before me was appalling. Phillips and Curtis were the same as Thompson and Michaels had been. Their throats were slashed from right to left, torso open, and organs laid neatly beside their bodies. The only difference between the other two murders and these two was that Officer Jenkins was still breathing. At least that's what it looked like. Luke knelt beside Jenkins, pressed 2 fingers to the side of his neck, and sighed in relief. "Is he alive?" I asked. "Luckily. Something must have startled the killer before he could kill Jenkins." "Okay, but what could have scared the person killing officers?" "Pretty sure he can tell us that." Luke shook his head. A low groan sounded. Luke and I glanced down at Dimitri as he stirred a bit. We helped him sit up just as the siren sounded in the distance. Dimitri held his forehead and groaned before he slowly glanced up at us. "What happened?" Dimitri asked. "We were hoping you could tell us," I replied. I got the call about a possible breaking and entering. I responded. So did Kyle and Micah. Are they okay?" "They didn't make it," Luke sadly answered. "I don't know what happened. One minute the 3 of us were about to enter the building." He pointed past us. "Then I woke up and you guys were here." Dimitri sighed. Blue and red lights brightened the area, even though we were beneath a street light. Car doors slammed shut. Sheriff Callahan was speedily walking towards us. "I want you two at the station to write up a report." Callahan shot us a stern look. "Jenkins will give his statement before going to the hospital." "Yes, sir," Luke nodded. I bit my tongue and followed Luke back to his cruiser. I had my opinions, but I knew better than get on Callahan's bad side, considering the newest murders. 3 officers were at the building, yet 2 of them still died. Whoever was killing our officers was smart, highly confident, and capable of taking down multiple people at once without leaving any evidence. How were we supposed to catch the person killing people if they didn't leave evidence? Luke and I remained silent while driving back to the police station. I spent the next few hours writing up a report on what happened. My stomach churned with every awful detail that I typed into the computer. I printed out my report, placed it on the sheriff's desk, and left the police station. That was my least favorite part about being a cop. Writing up reports about messed up things that I had seen, or stupid shit I had to deal with on shift. I returned home 15 minutes after leaving the station. I tossed my keys onto the kitchen counter and carefully dredged through the dark living room. I tripped on the stairs, cursing myself for being clumsy. It was my own house. I knew my way in and out, even in the dark. I stripped out of my clothes. Once I made it to the bedroom, I crawled into the plush king-size bed and tightly hugged Marcus. He was sound asleep, but I didn't care because he was safe and in my arms. I woke up late Thursday afternoon. Marcus was beside me, reading through papers from his own work. I scooted closer to him. A cute smile creeped onto his lips. He placed his right arm around my shoulders and held me against him. "Tanya called earlier this morning. Officer Kincaid was found behind the police station. She said he was murdered in the same way the others were," he explained. "I think I'm going to take a few days off. I can't handle this right now." "All right, so I'll take a few days off as well." "You don't have to do that." "Of course I do, honey. My job is to be here when you need me, and that includes right now." "I'm very lucky to have you, Marcus." I smiled. "No, I'm the lucky one," he chuckled. I leaned up as far as I could, kissed him, and hugged him tighter than I ever had. You might have been hoping for a romantic fairy tale of how Marcus and I met. Unfortunately, life doesn't work like that. But it was close enough. Marcus had been and will continue to be the light in my life, aside from you. Like I said, this week has been crazy, and I feel guilty for not writing sooner. But at least you know the reason why. Talk to you soon, little sister. I love you. Dean. So, now we know how Dean and Marcus met, and how our killer started his spree. Interesting who was left alive in those events. Thank you for listening to part 2 of There's a Killer in My Town by Beautiful Nightmare, aka Charlie Blackmoore. Speaking of which, she has just published another book of short stories. I'll have the link for you to choose paperback or Kindle version in the description. For this reading, I'm using the paperback version of the book, published on the 20th of July. If you want to get your own, there's a link in the description. You can follow her on Amazon or follow her on one of her Twitter accounts. Both are linked in the description as well. Now, we know a little bit more about Dean. We have learned about the first 5 murders. We got to know more about those who work with Dean and his relationship with Marcus. Are you getting an idea of who the murderer is? Do you have any guesses? What do you think of the situation in Snow Creek now? What do you think of Dean, our hero sheriff? Let me know what you think in the comments. While you're down there, please give the video a like and share it out. If you aren't subscribed, consider subscribing and ring the bell until it rings so you don't miss the next part. Again, I want to say thank you to everyone who has been so welcoming, supportive, and helpful. Until we meet again, have a wonderful day or night, and be safe.